Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining our webinar. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. All attendee lines are going to be muted just to prevent any background noise. So if you guys have any questions during the session, please enter those in the questions box on your control panel, and we'll take about 10 minutes for Q&A at the end of the webinar. If for some reason we don't get to cover all of your questions, we'll follow up with you one-on-one. Or maybe if your question is specific to your business environment, since all use cases will be different, we'll follow up with you one-on-one here as well. And lastly, you can all expect to receive a link to the recording via email within the next 1 or 2 business days. All right, without further ado, I'll pass the mic over. We have 2 duo presenters on the line today, Jennifer Golden and Wolfgang Gorlick. Jennifer, take us away.
Great, thank you. As Tracy said, my name is Jennifer Golden, and I am a product marketing manager at Duo Security. And I'm here today with Wolf Gorlick, who is one of our advisory CISOs. And we're really excited to have a conversation about how Duo is approaching risk-based authentication. But before we dive into the specifics of what exactly Duo is offering, we want to take a step back and really think about the world in which we operate. Because we can all see in our day-to-day life that the way we do business is changing. The impact of COVID has been widespread and long-lasting. So even if you're not working fully remote, many companies are offering hybrid or flexible arrangements. And we see people are logging in from a variety of devices, locations, and networks. And for all of our folks on the webinar here today who care about risk, this is a lot to keep up with. Luckily, we have Wolf on the call today, and so he can speak a little bit about his experience as a CISO and working with organizations. So it would be great to just sort of hear from you at the beginning about how have these organizations been impacted by changes?
Now, when I speak to other CISOs and CIOs, a recurring theme is that we've effectively done in a very short period of time what we thought we would do in 10 years, right? If I speak to healthcare, like, oh yeah, telehealth, we had planned on it. Remote workforce, we had planned on it. However, the numbers we're seeing, we thought we'd be there by around 2030. When I speak to financial services, I had a great conversation with a banking CISO recently. He's like, we always anticipated that with Gen Z and millennials, they would predominantly work off our apps, right? They would start accounts, they'd have relationships, they would close accounts, move things around, they would buy houses, they would do whatever they needed to do, predominantly online. But we figured we would get there by 2030. And of course, we have really radically compressed that timeline as we went through this great migration, arguably the first migration in human history. That's not from the country to the city, that's not from one place of land to another, but the first migration in human history that's really from the physical to the digital. And that move from the physical to the digital, that move from everything being in person to everything being online, has introduced a tremendous amount of risks. Not to mention, the changing the way that we work, that's really put a lot of us in this reactive place. Now we're reacting very quickly. We're reacting really good, right? We're very good at improvisation, but it really is time where we start honing in our strategy of what we're going to do with all these changes.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like you said, when you experience a change that's supposed to take 10 years and it only takes 2, there's a lot to deal with. And so we see that there's just more variables that companies have to manage than ever before. People might not have that same visibility into who's accessing sensitive corporate information. We see lots of different types of workers with different privileges. Plus, add on top of this that the threat landscape is constantly changing. Attackers are getting more sophisticated, and it can be really difficult to stay a step ahead and be vigilant about potential risks. Again, for people who really care about this, it's a lot to take in. So Wolf, how have you seen these different variables impacting organizations?
it's really led us to rethink how we're doing cybersecurity. If you think about it, like the fundamentals, when I got in, it was pretty straightforward, right? It was my employee on the computer I provided to them, in the office that my organization provided them, communicating over a network I ran to an application that I installed and hosted and maintained. Probably a part of my team or a function within the CIO org was doing some modification. Right? It was our app and our instance of that app, and it was hosted from our data center. And over the past decade, of course, all these things have changed as we've adopted infrastructure as a service, as we've moved from our apps to cloud apps, as we moved from our equipment to BYOD, as we moved from a dedicated workforce to really competing as an ecosystem with business partners and contingent workers and B2C and B2B relationships. And of course, as we've had this radical shift towards working predominantly from home. Now, if I look at the numbers from Gallup, at the height of the pandemic, it was 3 out of 4 professional workers in North America were working from home. 3 out of 4, incredible. It was like less than 1 in 4 in the beginning. Now that's come down. It's come down to closer to half, a little bit under half. It's moved from being solely work from home to being hybrid, which of course brings its own risks. But one of the conversations I had at the height of the pandemic was with a CISO, and he said something I will never forget. He said, "Wolf, what I now have to secure is 10,000 branch offices. Before that, maybe I had a headquarters, a couple satellite offices, a couple branches around the world. Now with 10,000 employees, I've got 10,000 branch offices to secure."
That's a scary number. When you think about, like you were saying, these changes, they're happening rapidly. You expect them to happen over the course of a decade. It happens in 2 years. And all of a sudden you go from managing one main office to 10,000 offices. That really makes it difficult to figure out how to assess and deliver that right level of trust. Again, everyone's in one location, makes it a little bit easier. But now we have new questions. If someone's on the same home Wi-Fi every day, is that trusted? Is that safe? What if they move to a coffee shop? And then we have to think about, well, are all applications and data created equal? Or should there be different policies for different types of content? And so there's not one right answer to this, but instead we can think about these questions, these challenges through the frame of zero trust, which is a well-established philosophy in security. Many of you have probably already heard it. I really like how our advisory CISO, Wendy Nather, defines it as trust being neither binary nor permanent. So on the binary side, it's not that trust is either granted or not granted. It's not a 0 or 1. But each circumstance is on a range of trust, if it's a high or low trusted situation, and really looking at the circumstances around that login. Additionally, it's not permanent. Just because I was once in a trusted situation, that does not mean I inherently receive that same level of trust again if my circumstances change. So this philosophy is really about being purposeful and thoughtful at each login attempt, which again this is difficult. It's not, oh, here, just put this one product in place and you solve zero trust. And Wolf, I know you've probably seen zero trust spoken about in every type of way, from misconceptions to different ways of viewing zero trust. So would love to hear just what does this mean to you?
Yeah, I like zero trust as a philosophy. I like zero trust as a mindset, not a product set. I like zero trust as a set of tenets. Now, of course, you can go out to NIST 800-207 and read those tenets, but to sum them up, they're things like I've got a trusted identity, a strongly authenticated identity. I've got a trusted device, a strongly authenticated device. That person on that device is making a request through a policy engine, and that policy engine is going to determine whether or not I'm going to trust them, not in a binary approach. And it's not going to be a permanent trust, like Wendy says. We're going to determine if we're going to extend that trust boundary or not. And those are the predominant tenets of zero trust. Now, when we get to Dual's perspective, one of the things that I've always appreciated about Duo back from when I was a customer was this underlying principle of get out of the way of the user while getting in the way of the adversary. So how can we do all those things while minimizing that that end user impact? And I know that's one of the things that that we're going to be talking about here in just a minute. One additional thing I want to say is we move from the principles of zero trust into the technologies of zero trust. There's been several emerging ways and patterns and practices to do zero trust. Things like taking a network approach, segmentation, microsegmentation, things like focusing on time of authentication authorization. And that's really where our topic is today, this idea of using risk-based authentication as the primary means of enforcing that policy, as that primary means of saying, not on a binary scale, but through a series of signals, do I trust you, as the primary means of either providing that trust or revoking that trust.
100%. That's exactly how we want to think about it. And one thing that you had mentioned is that we really want to get out of the way of users, but prevent attackers. Because zero trust could be pretty easy to solve for, is if you just make it really difficult for users to log in. Right? It's easy to realize a zero trust experience if you make it a really bad user experience. You could create long, tedious, repetitive steps, so users constantly have to prove their trustworthiness. You could raise the bar really high and make users use the most secure method at every login. But we realize, when we're working with our customers and with organizations, that this just isn't realistic. And when you conflict with business priorities and are just plain annoying, employees can find creative ways around these security requirements. And so we want to keep both of those at the front of mind of, like Wolf had mentioned, how can we get in the way of attackers, but not get in the way of trusted users?
Yeah, I like that you mentioned creative people, right? Because I like to say that a constrained person is a creative person, right? Constrained people are creative people, and creative people are what? Dangerous. They're the people who do things that we did not want them to do. That's where you get shadow IT. That's where you get devices you weren't aware of. That's where you get all sorts of things, which is even more likely and even more prevalent when people are in hybrid or work from home environments. So that the creativity to constrained to danger pathway is very real. The other thing I would say about this is people have choice. And they have choice to either opt into our security or not. Like I just talked about, they can easily work around us. Many do if we do the wrong things. They also have choice to opt into being with our organization or not. One of the things that surprised me, we did a security outcome study and asked 5,000 folks over multiple different countries, like how were you doing? What are you getting in terms of outcomes? Were you performing in terms of capabilities? And we said, hey, how is your zero trust? Is it limited? Is it progressing? Is it mature? And one of the things that struck out to me is this: organizations that reported having a mature zero trust implementation also reported being more than twice as likely to retain technical talent. Twice as likely. And I think that comes back to, if we respect the folks and we try to get out of their way, while getting in the way only when it matters, we're getting in the way when there's criminal activity, we have a clear path to not only have people opt into our programs, but to stay with our organizations.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, right? Because if we're getting in people's way and making it impossible to do their jobs and creating this culture where there's just security and business are constantly in conflict, that's also not what we want. It does make me reflect on a former life in which I was a teacher. And I know our end users are not like students, but of course, I have to think about my own experience as a way, as a frame for thinking about how can we evaluate trust and security. And so I just think back to my experience as a teacher where if I only had 2 classroom management tools, regardless of the student behavior. So if the student whispered to their friend during the class versus threw a pencil across the room, if my only response was to give a detention or to ignore it, that would be a pretty miserable classroom experience. My classroom would either be complete chaos, or it would be unbearable. And so that sort of helps set up this philosophy of risk-based authentication, of how can we find something in between in which the actions match the circumstance, which brings us to how Duo is approaching this. And so the philosophy of risk-based authentication is to put all of the work in the background. We're shifting the burden away from humans and putting it onto the technology. Thinking about what are all these risk signals at the point of login? How can we take in all those risk signals and in real time adjust the security requirements so that way the person is still able to access the resources they need to, but still proving that trustworthiness. So the solution is dynamic and behind the scenes, making it that the end user can have a more secure experience without feeling that additional burden. And that's kind of what we're always trying to balance here. Increase security without unnecessary friction.
What I particularly like about that is I was laughing when you threw up the memes a minute ago, that freedom one. You know, as a CISO in my younger days, I'm like, I shall lock everything down. If I hear anyone doing anything wrong, we shall give them awareness training. I remember like walking the halls and people seeing me like darting in cubes, and I'm like, oh no, that was me. It is so incredibly important to do something like RBA and really put the onus on the technology, really put the onus on those signals so that we can have much more of a dynamic experience, and so that we can really realize some of those principles we were talking about just a minute ago in terms of only getting in the way when it matters.
Right, and we don't want. Well, it sounds like, Wolf, that you're probably more like that detention meme than the freedom meme. So we don't want either of those. We got to find the balance. And so we're going to take a minute and dive into how Duo does this, because we want to be as transparent as possible about, all right, if we're saying this is a low trust situation, why is it a low trust situation? What risk signals are we taking in, and why? So one new risk signal that I want to take a minute and do a deep dive into is Duo's Wi-Fi fingerprint. This is a really important signal because it was created with the focus on privacy. Location signals are always tricky, right? Because employees are a little cautious. They don't want their work or employer tracking where they are if they move from the dining room to the kitchen. And some signals can be invasive. And while we have used things like IP address to evaluate location in the past, it's still a good signal, but there are some challenges with it. So if you're not all on a corporate network, that makes it a little more difficult. And if people are using a VPN, it might show someone has changed locations without them having actually changed. And then you're firing off all these false positives showing there's risk when really there's not. And so we really need a stable, reliable indicator of location, but also respecting people's privacy. So what Wi-Fi fingerprint does is it looks at that Wi-Fi network, the SSID. You all are probably familiar with this because when you go to select your Wi-Fi network, you'll see a name. You'll see the name of your home Wi-Fi. You'll see the name of your coffee shop Wi-Fi network that you are connecting to. If you live in an apartment, you might see 50 Wi-Fi names pop up. If you live in a neighborhood, you might just see you and your neighbors. But that SSID is a really stable and predictable indicator of location. And what Duo can do is take that data and anonymize it so we don't actually know where the person is, and compare it to past Wi-Fi fingerprints. So we can look at Wi-Fi fingerprint number 1 and Wi-Fi fingerprint number 2. If number 1 and number 2 are the same, the person has not changed locations. If they're different, then they have. And so using that along with IP address can help make sure that we're really evaluating location appropriately without stepping on our employees' toes.
And that privacy side is so critical. Because as we think about 10,000 branch offices, it's not as if we're going to send out all the same networking monitoring we would do to a branch office. No one wants that, right? No one wants everything you're doing to be monitored. No one wants your GPS and screens and photos of your driveway to be part of a security program, right? We're going to get some pushback on that. And again, if you think about what's important to organizations, retaining staff, having a good culture, you're really being able to drive forward initiatives through having good relationships. A lot of that comes down to respect, and a lot of that comes down to really making sure that we can make good security decisions without infringing on the workforce themselves. So I like this approach a lot. It also reminds me a bit of passwordless. So when we looked at passwordless, one of the concerns was, hey, I don't want the company to have my fingerprints. Yeah, absolutely. No problem. I don't want the company to have my face. No problem. It's on your device, right? We're only going to use that to unlock your device. Similar with this, I don't want the company to know where my house is. Yeah, no problem. What we're going to be looking at is, here's where you normally work, and here's what we see what that is. And we're going to look at that from an anonymized perspective. We're going to look at that from just these signals, but we're not like reading the SID as we're taking a fingerprint of it and comparing that. So I like this a lot. Back to the security outcomes study, and I mentioned culture. Again, we see organizations that say, hey, we've got mature implementation of zero trust. They are twice as likely to report we've got a strong security culture. And again, I believe it's right here, right? Respecting privacy, respecting people's ability to get their jobs done.
Right. We want that employee buy-in. We want everyone to be part of the security team. It's not just the security team. It's the whole organization that needs to get behind these protocols. So we're going to talk about one more risk signal, which is evaluating known attack patterns. So this one's really important because we hear a lot about MFA fatigue, where people might actually accept an MFA request that's not them because they're so used to it. So on the one hand, it's a good thing in that people are comfortable with using MFA, but on the other hand, it's a challenge because you're accepting a fraudulent login request. And so we want to be able to respond to those attack patterns to make sure that they're blocked at the point of login, and also to not bug these trusted users. So if your credentials are compromised, someone has your username and password, and they go to log into your account, then you're going to be the one that gets that MFA request. If you absentmindedly accept yes, or if you're going through some kind of a push harassment or push bombing campaign where you're getting it over and over and over, and it's 2 a.m. and your phone won't be quiet, then you might just hit that big green check mark. But if you can step up the security requirements to stop these attacks, again, in real time, then it can prevent that bad actor from ever gaining access.
And there's a couple of things there. One, we talked earlier about, we could just have people log in all the time. No problem. Just have them log in 10 times an hour. It'll be great. The more we do that, of course, the more that muscle memory is formed, the more that automatic, push to accept is ingrained, and the more likely these types of attacks are. So these things go part and parcel. But I do want to say something, if you don't mind, Jennifer. It's a little bit controversial, but I do want to say something. I get asked a lot, like, aren't you concerned that there's these types of attacks on multi-factor? Sure, absolutely, I am. However, this is almost a sign of maturity, right? This is a sign that we've reached a certain level of adoption with multi-factor, that adversaries have become incentivized to try and work around this control. And that's a good thing. For the longest time, what do we say? Patch your stuff and put on multi-factor. And if you did that, you had a very high likelihood that you were going to be in a secure state. Now that everyone is starting to do that, well, the adversaries have to come up with new ways. They're not just going to pack up their bags and, I'm done. Cybercrime's no longer for me. I'm going to go be an actor, right? I mean, it's just not that's going to happen. They're going to be like, all right, we need to do something else. We need to up our game. And that is what we're seeing here. Now we need to respond. Cybersecurity has always been a back and forth between tactics and responses. However, I do think we should just take a moment and realize that we've come a long way towards protecting accounts. In the old days, to your example, Jennifer, if someone had my username and password, it was game over. It was done. There's nothing you could do. Now we've got these things where adversaries are stopped. They're working around it. We of course need to roll out some better control. So I'm glad that we've got better ways to address this. And I'm looking forward to talking about that. But I do think it's worth taking just a moment to say, good. I'm glad criminals have to do this, and it's not as easy as it used to be for them to do business email compromise and account takeovers.
Well, just like the cyber criminals aren't going to go pack up their bags and say, okay, I'm going to go be an actor. We're also not going to pack up our bags and say, okay, we're just done protecting accounts. Similarly, Duo is also evolving to respond to these new attacks and making sure that organizations have the tools to be more secure. So one of those tools is a new user outcome. It's called Verified Duo Push. So if we think back to the kinds of attacks that we were describing, you're getting a push request over and over and over again, and your phone won't be quiet, and so you just hit that big green check mark. Well, you can't do that if you have to input a code. And so what Verified Duo Push will do is on that login screen, there'll be a code that pops up. We can see here in this screenshot of what the product looks like. It is a 6-digit code. We are going to make that configurable for organizations, so it can be anywhere from 3 to 6 digits, depending on their organization's tolerance for putting in these codes. Again, we want to make sure organizations have the tools to add just the right amount of friction for their organization. But so you see the code pop up on your login screen, and then you go into the Duo mobile app and you put in the code. And if you don't have that code, you can't just accept that big green check mark and let someone in. And instead you might say, oh wait, this isn't me. I am not trying to log in. So that, again, that fraudulent login attempt, that bad actor, is blocked at the point of login. On the other side, if it is you, if you're just in a new situation and you do need to log in, well, you've got the code. It takes a few more seconds than your normal Duo push, but you can self-remediate and you can reestablish trust. So then you can gain access. And then after you do it once, you'll go back to your normal login flow. So it's not a permanent state. That's, again, going back to the purpose of risk-based authentication. It's dynamic and responding to the context. And so once the trust is reestablished, you can go back to your normal login flow.
And this only adds a little bit of friction, right? And hopefully it's not a lot of friction. So oftentimes in security, we spend a lot of time trying not to be the department to know, trying to reduce friction, trying not to make people feel like they're in detention. And that's a good thing, right? That's a good thing. What I'm about to say does not change any of that. However, might I invite you to consider that a little bit of friction is a good thing. A little bit of friction is the rumble strips when you're driving down the highway and you start to nod off and like, oh, I swerved a little bit. I need to get back on the right path, right? A little bit of friction is when we get into the user space and we do interrupt them. And if we're not doing it very often, if this is not the norm, this is effectively user communication. There's something unusual that's happened here. I need to stop and think. We oftentimes, especially in Cybersecurity Awareness Month, say, I just want users to stop and think. Okay, here is a good way to do that, but use it sparingly, use it rarely. But when we do it, this is the opportunity where they go, okay, what's going on here? Why am I being asked this? And that allows the user to participate with us in making a good security decision.
Right, and the other thing too is you can use Verified Duo Push all the time. If you have a particularly sensitive application or really highly privileged users, you can turn it on. But what we hear from customers is it's just not necessary all of the time. And so that's why we have risk-based authentication as a way to turn it on when necessary. Or, every organization has their own risk appetite and they might want to turn it on all the time. And so as a user of Duo, you have that option, turning it on only through a risk-based response or having it on 100% of the time. So we're gonna take a minute and then take a step back and think about risk-based authentication as a whole. So again, just to summarize, at the point of login, Duo is taking in these risk signals, looking at the device, looking at the location, looking at these known attack patterns, and saying, well, where does this fall on the spectrum of trust? Reminding ourselves that trust is not binary. And if all is well, you can just let the user in. No re-authentication is required. Trust had already been established in a previous login. If something's off, if we see that, through location, through the IP address and Wi-Fi fingerprint, something fishy's going on here, then you can step up to a verified Duo push. If it's the authentic user, they can reestablish trust and gain access. If it's not, we can prevent that bad actor. And so I'm going to now pass it to Wolf, where he is going to walk us through a day in a life of someone using risk-based authentication.
So there we were. It was just, no.
Story time.
Yeah, story time. Think about, right, you're at home and you're working. Now you log in at the beginning of the day, you got your cup of coffee or tea or beverage of choice, you log in, you're going to get prompted. Push authentication, you go ahead and allow. Now behind the scenes, that's going to be checking a couple other things. Is this the device I trust? Is this device up to date? Are you in the right location? All those sort of things. We log in, we open up Duo SSO. I'm launching apps all day. Now, if the security team and IT team has configured it, I could run that way all day and probably not be prompted to log in to the end of the day. I mean, honestly, that's how I work every day. So that everything's good. Now it gets around lunchtime. You're like, you know what? I want to go out for lunch, get a coffee, whatever. You throw your bag in your backpack, throw your backpack over your arm, take a nice walk. It's a lovely day in the autumn. And your favorite barista has your favorite drink waiting for you. It's a good time. Now you're like, oh wait, I got to answer an email. I got to update a document off of online. Pull your laptop, open it up. Now at that point in time, trust is not permanent. You have changed. The situation has changed. So we're going to want to know that change, and we're going to want to ask you to log back in. And if you do this frequently, you're going to expect that. Okay, now I've moved locations. I'm going to be prompted to log back in. You log in. You reconnect, and now you can go back to working on your applications, even though your situation has changed. And when it changed, we made sure it really was you. It wasn't someone who stole your laptop. It wasn't a person in another location pretending to be you. We're going to verify that device. We're going to verify who you say you are. At some point in time, you go back home, keep on working. If we're in a situation where we've got someone gets a hold of your credentials, if we're in a situation where an adversary is trying to compromise your account, if that's happening, instead of getting blasted with pushes, first off, you're gonna be like, why am I getting a push? I should be just fine. I'm good to work all day. I work all day like this. Why am I getting bothered? I'm off of SSO. Everything's good. So first off, you're gonna notice that that's weird. That doesn't happen at all. Secondly, it's going to escalate it and move to this code, really communicating to you that something is amiss. Now, if it's not amiss, great, get on in and get work done. If it is something amiss, if it is an adversary working on your account, you can deny that and report that and work with your security team to resolve it.
Well, thank you for that story time, which brings me to our summary, which is, in order to enable this seamless and secure access, we have to continuously assess risk and trust all in the background, right? This is hopefully the theme that has been coming up over and over again through Wolf and myself, is that having good security is also having this good user experience. We want to be able to take in all of these risk signals when the user is authenticating, and in real time provide the equal amount of friction based on that circumstance, so the user can gain access and get to work. Most of the time, that's going to be the case, that it's going to be a trusted user logging into a trusted device who's just trying to go about their day. And so we want to make sure that we are protecting those logins and also not frustrating our users. So there are a couple key takeaways here. One is that user experience is key. All of our Duo users who interact with Duo every day, we want them to know that this is, Duo is used to protect their accounts, protect their security, and not meant to be any kind of blocker to getting their work done. We also think it's really important to maintain privacy. We want to make sure our employees feel good that when they're using Duo, that we're not violating that privacy, and as Will said, knowing what their driveway looks like. We want to respect that because our Duo users are our partners. And finally, we know that security requires flexible tools, and that's what we've seen, across the risk-based authentication solution, is being flexible based on the circumstance.
If you think about it from a CISO perspective or a CIO perspective, there's some very big macro trends we're dealing with right now. Certainly, hybrid work continues to be a theme as we went to almost all remote work and now to this blended model. Certainly, staff retention is a big theme. What's going on in this age of the Great Resignation? And I mentioned collapsing 10 years of progress into 2. Digital transformation. How can we be more strategic, more intentional, and more thoughtful about how we protect our customer interactions, how we develop our relationships with our peers, our staff, our broader business units? And a lot of that goes back to just these takeaways. So we want to provide a good experience. We want to provide good privacy. And we see, again, through things like the security outcome study, that organizations who are using risk-based auth and zero trust, who report that they've got a mature implementation, they're more than twice as likely to report they've got great relationships with security culture. They're more than twice as likely to report that they're retaining staff. They're more than twice as likely to report that they are operating efficiently with their security tools. I think it all goes down to this. As a security leader, you look at this and go, yes, this is what we should do. It's one thing to do that and feel in your gut, as I think so many of us will. And it's another thing to go, oh, and by the way, across 5,000 respondents across the globe, we've got data that backs up these points.
Well, I think that is a beautiful note to end on. And from here, we can take any questions that might have come in.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Everyone, just as a reminder, if you have the questions box on your control panel, please go ahead and feel free to start asking some questions. We've got a couple in, and I did also want to make a note for anyone that may have missed the announcement at the beginning that you guys will be receiving a link to the recording, which does contain the slides. Got a few questions about that, so I did just want to clear that one up. But the first on the docket here is the fingerprint based on network name or BSSID. And they're explaining, they're thinking about college or corporate campuses where individuals roam frequently, or even home mesh networks.
Yeah, so it is a combination of both the SSID and BSSID. And so that, if anyone's curious about learning more about the technical details, that's definitely conversations that we can have. Just for the sake of time, didn't dive into the technical details on that, but that user is correct. It is both SSID and BSSID that forms the Wi-Fi fingerprint.
Awesome. All right. Regarding verified push, a number of bad actors are now using VNC style kits that mirror the login page. And they're just hoping for a little more information on how verified push might defend against this attack vector.
Do you want me to chime in that one?
Yeah, Wolf, go for it.
So it's a combination of the verified push that you'd want plus the device identity. So yeah, if I can compromise a person and have them enter a code or have them push and provide a password, and I'm now going to replay that and use that to get in. Well, if they're not on my user's device, that's another indicator that we can use. So it is the combination that's going to provide that risk-based authentication and allow us to stop those adversaries who are using that method.
Cool. Is risk-based authentication only available for web-based logins?
Currently, I believe that is so, but we can confirm and get back to you.
Okay, awesome. So you can expect to receive an email from us just to help clarify that question. Is there any support for QR codes or other ease of use for MFA for young users like students?
No, that is not available. Again, if there's a particular need, you can always reach out to your Duo rep and provide that feedback. Our product team is always willing to, hear from our customers directly and understand some of those more individual needs. So no, it is not available, but if you are a Duo customer or you're interested in becoming one, we would love to hear a little bit more about that use case.
Awesome. Let's see, we may need a little more clarification on this question, but I'll read it out. What if someone is hardwired, not wireless?
Just in terms, are they asking in terms of Wi-Fi fingerprint?
Yeah, maybe Paul, if you can give us a little bit of extra clarification on that, and we'll come back to that question. Is this similar to universal push?
So risk-based authentication uses our universal prompt, which I think is what they're asking for, which is our newer prompt that we released last year. So it does use universal prompt.
Built on the same technology for sure.
Cool. Let's see. Is the verified push available for the local workstation login prompts?
That is a great question, and I am not sure. So I will have to circle back and find out for those more individual use cases. I'll have to find out those details.
Awesome. All right. So we did get a little more clarification on the hardwired question. So if you are hardwired, then there is no wireless fingerprint. So does that remove one of the factors from evaluation, or does it take information from the wired connection?
Okay, so if we don't have that Wi-Fi information, it treats it as if it's a new location, and we can still use IP address to determine if there's been a change. So typically when we have the two together, it makes it, obviously a stronger signal, less likely to have those false positives, but we can still evaluate location. Or again, it will show it as a new location if we just don't have it.
Cool, thanks. Is risk-based authentication configured per Duo application, or is it a global capability?
Well, it depends on how the user wants to use it. If they want to test it out with a specific use group, they can try that. You can always set up either global policies or application-specific policies within, the Duo admin panel, so users can have the flexibility to put it where it makes sense.
So back to memes, the answer is why not both?
Exactly.
Cool. We've got one more question here, and then we can close out unless anyone has anything else. This will give you guys a little bit of time to enter any last minute questions in. But for anyone that may be experiencing MFA fatigue, how does risk-based authentication help?
Yeah, Wolf, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so this gets back to reducing how often we're requiring people to authenticate. So you can do that a number of ways. First off, you can use the Remember Me functionality. Secondly, you can use single sign-on. So ideally, we're only asking them to authenticate and do that MFA push, 1, 2, maybe 3 times a day, right? It's not something they're doing every single time they're launching things. That's really the important way of setting it up and configuring it. And then if and when there's a push fatigue attack, which is again where they're getting a whole bunch of them, this is where we would intercept that and step it up to verified push.
Cool, thanks, Wolf. And we did get one more question. I'll ask this out. It may be a little technical, but is it similar to IP verification check done in the background by Duo?
I'm guessing this goes back to the Wi-Fi fingerprint question. And so just the clarification here is Wi-Fi fingerprint along with IP is working together to evaluate location. So the IP signal isn't going away. Wi-Fi fingerprint is just making that stronger.
All right. Cool. Well, that sums up all of our questions today. Thank you guys for asking some good ones. And for the 2 people who we said that we would follow up with, you can just expect to receive an email from us sometime before end of the week, and hopefully we'll get your question answered. But I did just want to thank everybody again for taking the time to join us. I want to thank Jen and Wolf again for presenting. It's an awesome presentation. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Cheers.
Thanks.
Thank you all.